Here we are. Next slide. So what is the Lost Woods project? So it's a landscape scale woodland project that started last year. It's been kind of bubbling away for the last couple of years. It's got four main partners: Woodland Trust, who I work for, Action in Rural Sussex, Small Woods, and the Sussex Wildlife Trust. And the whole aim of the project is reviving woods in a specific part of Sussex, and Sussex and Hurstby Point and Ditchling, they all fall within the project area, which is great. So we're reviving woods in this area for nature and for people. And so we're in a development stage at the moment, which commenced last July. And that stage goes through to early 2022. And we unlocked £349,000 worth of development funding from Heritage Fund. And Heritage Fund they used to be called the Heritage Lottery Fund. But they changed their branding earlier on last year. And so that's the kind of charity arm of the National Lottery. So basically, if you buy lottery tickets or you ever have, that money goes towards fantastic projects like this all over the country for nature and for heritage, cultural heritage, all those sorts of things. And so this phase that we're in at the moment, it's all about testing and piloting and consulting with local communities and landowners and lining up all of our projects and woods that we want to work in. And then we have to resubmit a second stage application back to Heritage Fund, which will hopefully, if we're successful, unlock a 5-year project worth just under £3.8 million. So the Low Weald and Downs, why have we called it that? So some of you may be familiar with these things. There may be some things that a lot of you know about already, and then hopefully there's some bits that you'll learn in this presentation as well. So what do we mean when we say the Low Weald and the Downs? So the High Weald, as you may know, is an area, the High Weald AONB, I'm sure you've all heard of that locally, which is made up of sandstones and clays. It's a bit higher up than the rest of the landscape around it. It's very heavily wooded. It's the fourth biggest AONB in the country, and it is the most wooded AONB in the country. And lots and lots of ancient woodland. The southeast generally is an ancient woodland hotspot, but there's lots and lots of it in the High Weald. And then kind of a halo around the High Weald. So you can see here on this map, I don't know whether you can see my mouse on the screen, but this area in orange where you've got Crawley and Horsham, Uckfield and Royal Tunbridge Wells, that's the High Weald. And then this yellow halo that you've got around it, that's the Low Weald. And that's an area that has been described as a quintessentially medieval landscape. So it's really wet and sticky. There's lots of clays. It's a low-lying clay vale, loads and loads of mud, very difficult to farm before the advent of tractors and modern industrial machinery. And so it has remained heavily wooded until the last couple of centuries. And then the Downs, there's this grey strip, obviously is the focal point of the South Downs National Park, and that is in the area that the project is operating in. That's famous for its big grassy chalk downland, undulating hills, the white cliffs, and it's a much more open landscape than you tend to find in the Weald. So our project area, it sits between really the High Weald AONB, and it takes in a little bit of the South Downs National Park, but it fits into this area that is between those two nationally designated landscapes. And the kind of the speckling that you can see over the screen there, that is all of the woodland across the whole of the southeast that you can see, and there are larger concentrations of that, as I previously just mentioned, in the High Weald. So you can see there on the right, there's a lot more woodland in that area, and in this central South Downs area, there's a lot more woodland cover. So the Lost Woods area kind of aims to connect the two of those, and the Lost Woods has a 15% woodland cover, whereas in comparison, the High Weald has about 25%, and the South Downs National Park as a whole has about 23%. And sort of being between those two landscapes, that area is it's forgotten a little bit. It doesn't get as much attention as a national park or as an AONB. So that's why, in a conservation sense, we really wanted to focus in on that area. So increasing the resilience and buffering woodlands in this area and providing greater landscape connectivity will only enhance that area, but also the national park and the AONB as well. So zooming in a little bit there, you can see the outline of our project areas. It's a bit of a funny outline. It kind of follows some parish boundaries, some roads and rivers, and it is all open to change at the moment. But you can see that, you know, Hurstbeard Point, Sussex and Ditchling, that falls all largely within the project area, which is great. So that speckling that you could see on the last screen, that was all the woodland cover, and we've zoomed in a little bit now, so you can see it's a bit clearer. And again, you can see there's really heavy woodland cover to the northeast and to the west. And in the project area, it's a bit more sparse. There are some large concentrations of woodland around Parham Park and RSPB, Pulborough Brooks there. And as you move further into the eastern Low Weald, there's a bit more woodland over in that direction. But you know, woodlands generally are a lot smaller. They're more fragmented. Yeah. So, but 30% of those woodlands are ancient, and ancient woodland is particularly special. It's such an important landscape. Sorry, not landscape. There's somebody, I think we haven't got everyone on mute there. Just flagging that one up. So with ancient woodlands, as I just said, there's 30% of the woodland is ancient. And so in terms of conservation, the first point of conservation is looking after what you've got, rather than focusing on creating new habitat and connecting it all up. That is super important. But ancient woodlands is that real core habitat where, you know, species have been there for a long time. It's hugely rich, hugely biodiverse, and so we want to concentrate our efforts on making sure that that core habitat is in as good a condition as it can be. So ancient woodlands. So woodland generally covers around 10.5% of the UK, but ancient woodland only covers about 2.4% of the UK. And before humans came along and started chopping down woods, many thousands of years ago, huge portions of the country would have been covered in ancient woodland. You know, it's very difficult to tell exactly how much. Some people theorize that the whole country could have been kind of a waterable forest, and other people theorize that it would have been a slightly more open landscape. But, you know, it's very likely that 40, 50, 60% of the country would have been covered in woodland without human intervention. So you can see how much of that has been lost, which is a terrible shame. So ancient woodland, the definition of ancient woodland, we know it's at least 400 years old from looking at historic maps. So the most reliable maps, they're not terribly reliable, but the most reliable maps that we're basing this assumption of come from the 1600s. This map that you can see on the screen here is the oldest that I could source today, which comes from 1874. So if we look back through time, and we can see that on those first maps from the 1600s, there's a woodland there. And then we look at all the various iterations of maps that have been produced over the decades and the centuries up until now. And if a woodland has been there continuously on all of those different versions of maps in the same place, then we know that that woodland has continuously been there. And it's a pretty good bet that it's been there for hundreds or thousands of years previous to that first map in 1600 as well. And so that's really how we define ancient woodland. And I've zoomed in here to Butcher's Wood, which is just south of Sussex. So hopefully a few of you are familiar with that wood. It is a Woodland Trust wood. And if we look at what that looks like today, you can see that those woodlands all around there. I'll just flip between those quickly. Most of the extent of those woodlands that were on the 1874 maps are still present. There is a section of Butcher's Wood that has been lost to this development to the north, but most of it is still there. So we can confidently say that that woodland has been there probably much longer than 400 years, and probably more likely since the last glaciation period. So there are two types of ancient semi-natural, two types of ancient woodland. We define that one of them as ancient semi-natural woodland, and that's woodland that we know is it's continuously been, well, it's ancient woodland, so we know it's continuously been here. It's most likely than not been disturbed to some extent by human activity. So, you know, over time, humans have used woods for coppicing, for fuel, for building, for building materials for their homes, for building ships, particularly on the south coast. Huge, it was a huge source of timber for building all of our naval ships a couple of centuries ago. And these woods have been worked for a long time, but usually in kind of in tow with nature. So nature would benefit from humans coppicing the trees and letting more light in and creating a varied woodland structure that is good for biodiversity. So in ancient woodlands, you can find lots of different indicator species as well that indicate that it is ancient woodland. So these are things like bluebells, wood anemones, primrose, wild garlic, and they also support indicator species as well. So we know that some types of bats, barberstale bats and Beckstein bats, particularly enjoy living in ancient woodlands and the older trees that you find there. And the reason that you find those indicator species, particularly the plants in ancient woodland, is because they take a very long time to move anywhere. If you think about a bluebell, it grows in the spring, it grows its flutes, and it will bend over about 1.5 inches, 2 inches in one direction, and then it will drop its seeds. And that is how far a bluebell can move in 1 year. So it takes a very long time for bluebells to reach a woodland. And so if that woodland is destroyed, then it's very difficult, well, it's almost impossible for these species to return without intervention, because it takes such a long time for them to get there. And that's why ancient woodland is so important from a biodiverse sense, because it's taken all those species such a long time to get there and pull together that really diverse assemblage. So that's ancient semi-natural woodland, and that's, you know, generally made up of native broadleaf species. In Sussex, there we've got lots of ash, obviously, but oaks, hazels, hornbeam is a big one in Sussex. And so you get an image like this, you know, a wonderful, fresh, green, luscious broadleaf woodland, ancient semi-natural woodland. And then the other type of ancient woodland that we split it into is a planted ancient woodland site, or a pause. And this is where you had an ancient woodland that had broadleaf species, very similar to what we saw on the last slide, but all of those trees have been removed and then planted with what is effectively a crop. So a lot of the time that is coniferous species, Scotch pine, or hemlock or something like that. So a short rotation tree crop that can be cut down in 40 or 50 years, just like any other crops really, but just over a longer period of time. So it's timber production, and it's done for money rather than for wildlife. And so you can see, in comparison to the previous slide, there's not much going on in this wood other than the trees. You haven't got much of an understory there at all. And because it's not diverse in any sense, they're generally single species plantations. You don't get all of those different wildlife types that rely on all of the different types of trees that you would find in a diverse broadleafed ancient semi-natural woodland. So going back to our Lost Woods project area there, so we can see that these are all of the woodlands in total. And moving on to the next slide, that's the ancient woodland. So I'll just move between the two. So you can see that's all of the woodland, and then 30% of that is ancient woodland. And the green polygons on here, these are ancient semi-natural woodlands. And these red polygons, this is the pause, so the planted ancient woodland sites. So those ones with the conifers. And so there are quite a lot of these in the project area. And the ancient semi-natural woodland, again, a lot of it is so small. It can be sort of 0.3 of a hectare in a lot of instances. And the smaller a woodland is, the more vulnerable it is. It's got a bigger edge to volume ratio, so the impacts coming at it externally are much bigger. And so, yeah, we know that ancient woodlands in this area are really at risk. so these are the types of woods that we're prioritising with the Lost Woods project. So what's degrading these woods? I've mentioned lots of things that are degrading these woods, so I'll mention a few of them. I haven't got time to talk about all of them. But one of the big ones is invasive non-native species. And this is a wood that we've been working with in the project area. Some of you may recognize this species that we've got here. This is cherry laurel. And in this particular woodland, this cherry laurel has been growing for decades and decades. And was probably planted with good intentions by a gardener at some point. You know, it's a good hedging plant. It creates very dense hedge so that you can't see through it, and has nice flowers in the spring. It's very similar species to rhododendron that has particularly rhododendron ponticum with pinky flowers. Very, very popular, but if it gets into a woodland setting and is unchecked, it can spread through the woodlands completely unchecked. These species didn't grow in this country originally, and so they've come here. Nothing is evolved or adapted in this country to eat these things, or even to. There's no natural pests at all, so there's nothing to keep them in check. So they just spread throughout a wood. It's got really thick, waxy leaves, so it blocks out a lot of the light. And this photo, I think I've enhanced it slightly so that you could actually see something in it. But if you go into these woods where they're infested with cherry laurel and rhododendron, it's very, very dark, and the leaves contain a lot of toxins, and they create this kind of impenetrable semi-toxic mat on the woodland floor, which suppresses all of that great and diverse woodland flora that we were talking about. So there's bluebells, primrose, wood anemone, wild garlic. None of that can really grow through when it's got this bad. There's lots of other non-native species that we find. A lot of them garden escapes, things like bamboo, particular types of bamboo can spread throughout a woodland, snowberry, all sorts of different things. I think in this woodland we identified 14 different species, and it was I think that's a hangover. It was an old Victorian large kind of country estate garden, and has had lots of things planted in there, and then it's been left unchecked and it's just gone completely out of control. Overbrowsing is a huge issue across the country. In the southeast, it's a very big issue for anybody that owns woodlands. So deer are a natural part of our ecosystem. It's wonderful to see them out in the landscape when you're wandering around. But unfortunately, humans over time have wiped out all of their natural predators. So like the rhododendron, and the cherry laurel, there's nothing to keep deer in check. So, you know, originally we would have had things like wolves that would have been able to predate upon these creatures and keep their numbers at a sustainable level. And deer, their favorite thing to eat is young trees. And so they come through a woodland and they munch off all of the fresh growth on the woodland floor. So that's what you're seeing here with this stick. This is a classic deer damage. And so that suppresses a new generation of trees growing in these woods. And so in many woods that you walk through, you might think it's wonderful. You can see really far through this woodland. But what you want when you walk through a woodland, you want actually to not be able to see it. You want the woodland to be messy and have a really good understory, lots of different trees growing. So if you can see a long way in a wood, you know that there's a very good likelihood that you've got deer in there, and they're munching away all the young trees. And if we don't tackle this problem and try to lower the deer numbers in a safe and sustainable and ethical way, then these woods will really suffer, because they won't have the young trees growing up to replace the older trees in the long run, and eventually those woods will just peter out because we won't have new trees growing in to replace them. Plantations, so that's what I've talked about a little bit already. So this is a woodland that we visited in the project area, and you can see there's absolutely nothing growing on the woodland floor in this woodland. I think this is hemlock that we've got growing here, maybe a bit of Scots pine. That's generally what it is across this side. And in the foreground, you've got an oak here, which is just about hanging on, but it won't last much longer. Similar to the cherry laurel and the rhododendron, these trees you know, their dense foliage takes out all of the light, so you don't get as much light reaching the woodland floor. And again, the coniferous needles, they're acidic in nature, and so they suppress, they change the chemical structure of the soils and stop a lot of things going up. But these woodlands, they can be restored, and that is one of the things that we're really going to be focusing on with this project, because the most important part of an ancient woodland, it's not actually the trees, it's not all of the things that you see above ground, it's the soil itself. That's where the nutrients are, that's where the seed bank is, that's where all the fungal hyphae mycelial networks are that keep a woodland functioning. So if we can take away these plantation trees after they've had after they've grown up, you can harvest them for timber, and then we can revert this back to a decent broadleafed natural woodland again. So it will look similar to those luscious pictures that we were seeing earlier of ancient semi-natural woodland, because there still will be viable seeds in here in the seed bank for all of those things to be able to grow up and for it to be a fantastic woodland again. But if it becomes if we fell the trees and plant another plantation, then that will have serious impacts on the wood. You can have massive soil erosion from these woodlands when you harvest the trees, so your soil can get washed away, and you know that really stops the woodland being viable in any sense. And then you lose the woodlands, and these woods are irreplaceable. Once you've lost them, you cannot replace them. So those were kind of the internal pressures within woodlands. So now we'll just go over some of the external pressures coming in from the outside. So I'm sure many of you have seen, they're happening all over the southeast currently. New developments popping up and encroaching into the countryside. And when developments happen, they butt up against woodland. There's many more things than just. So the cutting down of trees is obviously very destructive to the woodland. If it's going to encroach into a woodland, you can't actually cut down ancient woodland to create development. That was something that we successfully campaigned against, and is now part of planning policy across the country. But other secondary woodland can be chopped down for development. But you get edge effects from development, lighting, light pollution, which will affect all sorts of all the insects and moths and the bats and everything that predates on that in the area, and noise pollution as well. So it's not just housing and developments, things like new roads, dividing landscapes, and splitting them up. A road is really a completely impenetrable barrier for wildlife. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of wildlife on the side of the road that's just desperately trying to cross to try and find somewhere to live. So development has massive impacts on woodland across landscapes. And intensive farming as well. People are thinking a lot more proactively, and there's a lot of good farmers out there that are doing new things. But over the last couple of centuries in intensive farming, the sizes of fields have expanded exponentially. Traditionally we would have had lots and lots of small fields with lots of different crops on, and still not a brilliant landscape for wildlife, but still very, very diverse. And really importantly, with hedgerows and shores and landscape trees being stepping stones and connectivity between those bigger patches of woodland. But when you make fields bigger, you have to get rid of your hedgerows, and so that connectivity in the landscape is lost. And so woods effectively become islands in a sea of development and intensive farming. And those species are a lot of the time not adapted to be able to move across this hostile landscape. So that's all sounded very miserable and hasn't painted a very good picture of what's going on. So what are we going to try and do with the Lost Woods project to try and make that ancient woodland better? So one of the core aims within this project is to help these ancient woodland owners. And we know from research that we've done that there are over 600 different owners of ancient woodland across the project area. The project area is 400 square kilometers. And this is something that we see across the southeast because it's got a higher population. So over time, land has been divided up even more and more. So when a farmer retires and leaves the farm, to their children. The farm a lot of the time will get split up into 2 or 3 or 4 different chunks, and then when that generation comes to an end, it gets split up, split up over and over again over centuries. So we've just ended up with lots and lots of different ownerships of land, which makes it very, very difficult to manage woodlands in a holistic way. And if you own woodland that is over 3 hectares, you can get support from the Forestry Commission to manage your woodland and do some of the things we've been talking about, or to tackle some of the issues we've been talking about. But if you own a woodland that's under 3 hectares, which is actually a large proportion of the ancient woodland in this area, you can't get any financial help. So via the Lost Woods project, we will be able to provide financial help to these woodland owners to tackle these problems in their woods. So what we are doing is we're proactively contacting woods that we know are under threat and are suffering some of the biggest impacts, and offering these owners restoration surveys. So we'll go in and look at the woodlands, see what the problems are, what the threats, and set out prescriptions of how we can tackle those things and get that woodland into good condition and thriving with native species over the next few years. And those restoration surveys can then be turned into signed off woodland management plans. And then after that, we can fund those interventions that will boost native biodiversity. So what we'll do when we go into these woodlands, we'll identify the biggest threats. So if it's a woodland where invasive species are rife, there's loads of cherry laurel or rhododendron like we saw on a previous slide, we'll tackle that issue. So that image that you can see there, this was some work that we funded in October or November last year, where we went in and removed a lot of this, well, actually all of the cherry laurel across this site, which is fantastic. It's completely changed the whole dynamic of the woodland. But if it's a woodland that's being severely impacted by deer, we can install deer fencing to exclude the deer for a period of time to allow a new understory and the next generation of trees to grow up in that woodland. And also we're looking to create new habitat via natural regeneration. So the Woodland Trust does a lot of tree planting activity, but here in Sussex, and building on the successes of places like Knepp Estate locally, with all of the new wooded habitat that's being created there completely naturally by natural regeneration, that's what we want to do. We're going to create new habitat that increases the size of these vulnerable small patches of ancient woodland, also connects up these patches of ancient woodland as well. If you don't know what natural regeneration is, it's effectively just letting the trees plant themselves. So trees have been doing that ever since they evolved. They've evolved all sorts of different mechanisms for seed dispersal via wind or via the droppings of birds. And it does take a little bit longer, but those seeds, when they're being sourced from surrounding woodlands and all of the trees that are growing there naturally, they're genetically adapted to growing in Sussex and within this area. So they're going to be more resilient to things like climate change in the future. So that's something we're really hoping to push. Another big aspect of the project is ancient and veteran trees. So ancient and veteran trees, the definition is a little bit different from ancient woodland. So, and it's a little bit confusing. I do another talk about ancient and veteran trees, which goes on for about an hour. So I'll try not to talk too much about them. But the definition of an ancient tree, it varies by species. So it's a tree that is in the end stages of its life for its species. So for example, something like an oak tree, that will be much, much older. So that would be approaching sort of 500, 600, 700 years. And then some of these trees exist until they're even over 1,000 years old, oak trees. But for something like a silver birch, it will be ancient at something more like 80 to 100 years because they just don't live as long. And then a veteran tree is a tree which isn't old for its species, but it is showing the features of an ancient tree. So when a tree reaches a more grand age, it starts to hollow out, it starts to retrench, so it starts to get smaller in size, lose some of its limbs that higher up in the canopy. You'll start to see a lot of decay, a lot of dead woods, and that is really what makes ancient and veteran trees so special in terms of biodiversity, because you get that variability of habitats within the tree. So the dead wood and the fungi and all of the humus that is produced from that creates all sorts of different microhabitats, which allows saprophilic invertebrates, so that those are insects that have evolved to specifically utilize dead and decaying wood, and that in turn provides a food source for, you know, that whole food chain going all the way up to birds and apex predators. So they're really, really important, and also really important culturally as well. I mean, things like yew trees in churchyards, they've been there for centuries and predate churches a lot of the time. So they're really important culturally, and they tell a story. So in a landscape sense, we've got something called the Ancient Tree Inventory. We've been recording ancient and veteran trees for a long time, about 20 years. So zooming out into the southeast, you can see again, there's been a lot of recording in the nationally designated landscapes of the High Weald AONB and the South Downs National Park. But in the Lost Woods area, there's not been as much recording at all. There are some clusters of ancient and veteran trees that have been recorded. Parham Park there in the west has got a lot of trees which have been recorded. Sheffield Park over there in the northeast, National Trust site, has had a lot of recording. But we know that these trees are out there, it's just that we haven't found them yet. So we've recruited a cohort of 5 fantastic volunteers, and we're going to be developing a methodology for recording trees across this whole landscape. And that's not something that's been done before, to our knowledge, anywhere in the UK or maybe even the world. And so we're devising this methodology so that we can record all of these trees across this whole landscape. And now that's been done, you know, on a whole estate, but it's never been done across multiple ownerships, across, you know, at almost a district level. So it's really pioneering. It's going to be hugely challenging. And once we move into our delivery phase, we'll be recruiting a lot more volunteers for people to get involved and start recording specifically in their local area. And we think we're going to be following a parish-based approach. So we'll go parish by parish, or maybe we'll have a few running at each time, but that just makes it easier for us to say, okay, we're going to be recording all of the trees in Plumpton Parish over the next 3 months, and we'll aim to get everything done and move on to the next one. And it's really important that we record these trees, because once they're recorded, we know where they are. And then when things like developments happen, you know, that tree has been recorded, we know where it is, so we can safeguard it against the development, and we can put in mitigation measures to make sure that that tree is retained within the landscape. So we're also offering funding to the owners of ancient trees, like we're doing with Ancient Woodland, to produce tree management plans. So, you know, we produce woodland management plans for whole woodlands, but individual management plans for whole trees, because these trees, they, you know, only a very small percentage of trees will reach these grand ages. And so it's really important that we look after them. So they do need their own management plans a lot of the time. And a lot of the time people have no idea how to look after them. So it's knowledge and training and showing people and explaining to them, this is how we're going to look after these trees. We provide funding as well. So, you know, a lot of the time trees can be suffering from pressures of root compaction. Lots of people like to go up to these trees. They're fantastic things to experience and touch, but lots of people visiting trees or also grazing animals as well take shelter under these trees. They go to the toilet under those trees, which it's you know, when animals go to the toilet, they bring fertilizer, and it creates an abnormal environment underneath that tree. And so a lot of the time, if we fence off these areas, we can stop a lot of these issues from happening. And also, it's really important that we try to establish a next generation of these trees. So older, more mature trees that we've got in the landscape already, we want to make sure that they're safeguarded and they're brought on to become the ancient trees of the future, to replace the ones that we will inevitably lose due to natural causes over time. So if we do all of these things in a conservation sense, we will end up with woods and a landscape that's better managed for wildlife. It will be a more permeable landscape for wildlife, and it will give us the best chance at reversing the biodiversity declines that we're seeing, not just in Sussex, but across the whole world. So Lost Woods really is it's a project that is tackling a global issue of the climate and ecological crises, but we're doing what we can with what we've got in Sussex. So a lot of the time, you know, people think about the Amazon rainforest, you know, we've got to save the rainforest, but we've got these fantastic habitats with all of this bursting with wildlife and really special things that we could lose forever if we're not careful. And we've got all these things on our doorstep, so it's so important that we look after them. That's one strand of the project. The next strand of the project is engaging all of the local communities and all of you lovely people in the woods so that you can get out there and appreciate them and obtain all of the wonderful benefits that they provide for free. So our partners, Action in Rural Sussex, are taking a community asset-based approach to engaging with communities across the landscape and engaging them in trees and woods. And we know that people engaging in woods and spending time underneath trees, it brings massive benefits for people's health and well-being, and it can boost you know, local communities. It can help out so things like social prescribing. So people, you know, if they're going out and being active and spending time in woods, it boosts their whole and their overall health. So perhaps they won't need to use things like the National Health Service more, which is fantastic. What are the things Action Rural Sussex is doing? They're developing an online community tool so people know what woods they can go and visit, where they are, how to get to them, how they can interact with them, what different things are available to do there at different times of the year. We'll be working with woodland owners to create woodland working groups and conservation parties to do all of the things that we were talking about to make ancient woodlands better and thriving with wildlife, and also in some cases creating new access into woodlands. So where people haven't previously been able to access a woodland close to where they live, we're hoping that we can work with some private woodland owners to allow new access into woodlands for communities so that they can unlock those health and well-being benefits and just spend more time outside amongst trees. But being community-led, this part of the project, we're not 100% sure what all of these projects will look like yet, and that's one of the really exciting things about this development phase. But I mean, if you're part of a community group and you've got any ideas of how you'd like to engage in woodlands or green spaces more generally, then do get in touch with us and we can set up a time to have a chat with you and explore those ideas. Something else that Action Rural Sussex is doing is a pilot project of a John Muir Award. So John Muir Award is an award that's been set up by the Muir Trust. So John Muir is a famous adventurer, Scottish adventurer, who had a real passion for wild places. So it's about connecting young people, not just young people, with all generations, with wild places and understanding what they're all about and instilling a sense of responsibility until they understand what's important about them so that they can talk about them and they're looked after into the future. And we'll be hopefully filming some of these journeys of these participants within our development phase to encourage more people to get involved once we move into the delivery phase. Another one of our partners, the Small Woods Association, at the moment they're doing some surveys, a skills analysis survey for the owners and managers of woodland across the project area, to find out what the skills gaps and knowledge are, what are the things that are stopping these people from managing their woodlands. So once we've analysed that, they will develop a comprehensive training program for owners and managers of woodlands, and also local people as well, to learn cultural heritage skills like hedge laying or coppicing or woodland product manufacturer, willow baskets, all those sorts of things. And for the owners and managers, it will be things like chainsaw courses or more traditional low impact harvesting techniques like horse logging, for example. So lots of exciting stuff will be happening there. Sussex Wildlife Trust are a partner, and they're looking at the moment into lost audiences. So trying to find out who are the people that aren't visiting woods and why they aren't visiting them, why are they not coming to woods. So once we've identified those things, what are those things that are really stopping people from coming to the woods to engage in them and spend that really important time amongst nature and trees, we can hopefully tackle some of those barriers so that we can unlock more opportunities for a wider array of people to visit woods. Sussex Wildlife Trust are also building on the Forest Schools network that is established in the area. We'll be training up new leaders, working with private woodland owners to open them up for access to local schools to have forest school groups in them. And again, overcoming those barriers for children engaging in woods. There's all sorts of studies that have happened in recent years about how much more beneficial and positive the learning is for young people if they learn in an outdoor and particularly a woodland setting. I'm not 100% sure what that is. I'm sure that's all in the scientific data, but we know that learning experiences outside are fantastic for children. So we're hoping that we can open these woods up so that children can have those experiences and learn better as well. We're also going to have a storytelling project that has a woodland arts element to it as well. So we're looking into uncovering lost stories, all of those cultural stories that have happened in woods, you know, myths, legends, witches. Sussex is full of all sorts of these things, and there's the Centre for Mythology and something or other based at Chichester University. So we're looking into the history of local woodlands to unlock these stories and retell them to a 21st century audience, so these stories not lost. And we also want to hear about stories that people have got of their local woods. You know, what did you do in your woods when you were growing up? What stories, what kind of monsters or witches did you make up? So we can record all of these things as well for future generations. So we'll be developing storytelling trails and benches as well to guide people through a woodlands and give them a purpose to being there and kind of retelling these stories as people move through woodlands. It adds another layer of experience when you're in a woodland and you've got a story to follow like that. We're also working towards a woodland procession that will be an annual event that happens across the project area with different school groups and families and communities from the area, with lantern processions through woodlands and getting lots of people out there and experiencing woodlands together as well. Lots of art, lots of theatre, lots of music, lots of exciting things that's being developed. So that, in a nutshell, is the Lost Woods project. I'm sorry if I've gone over time on that. I haven't gone too far over. So if you want to find out more about the project, our main outlet for information is our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Lost Woods Sussex, or if you just type Lost Woods in on Facebook, because you're based in Sussex, I'm sure it'll come up straight away. And you can also email us on lostwoods@woodlandtrust.org.uk, or you can ask me a question now. So that's the end of the presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Ed. That was really interesting, and it's really cool and exciting to hear such a diverse project.
It's very diverse.
Yeah, you're going to have your hands very busy.
Yes, yeah, yeah, but we've got a fantastic team of people on board already. We're funding Poster Action in Rural Sussex to develop all of this community work. And as we move into our delivery phase, the project team will expand again to bring in new landowner engagement advisors and community engagement officers to be able to do all of that work, because it is a lot of work.
And that will be next year, is it, the delivery phase?
So we'll be submitting our second round application by the middle of next year at the latest. So the delivery phase would likely start in the autumn next year.
Fantastic. So I can see there's a few questions here, and if you have got a question, then please do type it into the chat, or you can use the little raise your hand thing and unmute yourself and ask Ed. I was really happy to hear that you're looking at natural regeneration as well. That's really cool. I was just going to ask, I mean, I think you've given some ideas anyway, but is there anything particularly that local communities can do sort of now to support the project? Is there anything that we can do in that regard, or is it?
So right at this moment in time, we are being slightly hampered by the lockdown. Most of the project team is on furlough at the moment, so at the moment it is just me working on the Lost Woods project, but within the next few weeks we will be back up to full strength again. So yeah, there are things that we can do. We've got surveys out, and if you look on our Facebook page, there's a survey for local communities, which is really directed specifically at people living in the local area, which is that's really it would be great if all of these people that we've got on the call from Sussex, Hurstby Point, Ditchling could complete that survey. so that we can understand how people are
Yeah.
using woods in the area. That would be great. But as we move through this year, there will be lots more opportunities to interact with us as we move through. But we are, like I said, suffering from the lockdown at the moment. But do still get in touch with us. We will get back to you. Yeah.
That's lovely. I think we're all suffering from the lockdown, Ed.
Yes.
At least you and me definitely are. I'm sure there's others on the call that are. I'm sure we can put the Facebook link in our next newsletter. That might help
be great.
get out to people. So let me just quickly start from the top. So Roy and Pat were asking about mature roadside oaks that are being felled. Shouldn't they be protected? Can you talk anything a little bit about protection of individual trees?
So I'm not an expert on tree protection orders, things like that. But what I can say is if those trees are ancient or veteran trees, anybody can record a tree to the ancient tree inventory. So if you go to our website, I can send you a link to that, Laurie, and if you want, you can send that around.
Thank you.
And so if you record a tree to the ancient tree inventory and it gets verified by one of our verifiers as indeed ancient or veteran, so we'll come back with an expert and we'll check that, then that means that tree can't be felled unless there is an extremely good reason to do so, because ancient and veteran trees are now protected under the National Planning Policy Framework. I don't know if you can add anything, Laurie, about tree preservation orders or anything. I mean, contact your local tree officer, your local tree warden. These services have been cut drastically over the last few years, so you know there isn't enough people to be able to stop these things happening a lot of the time. But yeah, that's about all I can say on that one.
So that's great, thank you, Ed. So there was a question from Steve about, are you looking at ancient veteran trees in woodlands only, or including those in hedgerows or isolated locations? And we're pleased to know that Karen has answered that question for you, saying that it's landscape trees as well, because Karen has introduced herself. So Karen's from Action in rural Sussex.
Hello, Karen.
I think Karen's known to you.
You've snuck in. I'm glad she hasn't been heckling me.
So I don't know, Karen, if you want to say just a quick hello to everyone and let them know what your involvement is.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hello. Yes, hi. So yeah, I'm from Action in rural Sussex, and we've got a team of 3 community development workers and an admin worker and our manager Steve. And yeah, we're really our role is to help the community to become involved in this project. So trying to reach people that wouldn't normally become involved, as well as those people. It's great to see so many people here. It's really exciting that there's a lot of interest. So yeah, so really we'd like to hear from people who got, maybe they know of a bit of woodland in their area that they think, you know, could be part of the project, or it might be that they know of local groups that might be wanting to engage, because really what we want is to help people to feel connected to their woodlands, to care about them, to get the benefit from them in any way they can. So we're sort of just, yeah, we just want to sort of hear from anyone who's interested in being involved or knows anyone who would, really. So.
Brilliant, thank you. That's super, Karen. And yeah, you're right, it's so important that we're connected to our woodlands. So we'll, like I said, we'll do what we can to kind of connect people to the project. There's a question here from Juliet. So Juliet's asking, what can we do to safeguard small patches of woodland that are under threat from new housing developments? So she's given a sort of local example. Have you got any thoughts about that, Ed?
So any woodland that is under threat from development, the best thing that I can think of to do is to report that to our Woods Under Threat team. So the Woodland Trust, you know, campaigns to stop woodlands being lost. We do have a focus on ancient woodland, obviously, as that's the most important woodland for biodiversity and culturally as well. But it's worth sending information about any woodland that's going to be lost to development, and we can comment on those planning proposals. And you know, Woodland Trust can bring a lot of weight to these things if we comment on them. We also run campaigns as well, particularly for larger areas of woodland that are under threat. Things like the A27 bypass woodland, ancient woodland that was under threat. We ran a joint campaign on that. So yeah, get in touch with us and report it to us, and if we can do something about it, then we will.
That's really useful. Thank you, Ed. And I mean, Ed pointed out in his talk the the threats from woodlands becoming further fragmented. So there are, in theory, there should be measures in a sort of planning application that retain that connectivity, but it's not always done. So yeah, it's good that you're looking out for your local woodlands. I don't know if anyone has any other questions that they want to ask. You've got some lovely thank yous in the chat, Ed. The people have really enjoyed your talk, so that's really nice. If anyone's got any other questions for Ed or for any of the HKD committee, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have just got one extra thing to highlight, if that's okay. It's something that's pertinent, obviously, to your group. So we are actually working with the Hurstfield Point and Sayers Common Parish Council on the woods at Tilly's Copse and the Wilderness. So we've been working with Georgina, who's on the call there. Hi, George. So we've done a restoration survey there to find out what were the things that were impacting the woodland, and we've recently followed that up with a woodland management plan. So now we've got a real plan for getting that woodland back into good condition and restoring it. But there's lots and lots of things to do there. And what we really want to do is engage communities in making this happen. So we don't really want to come in and do all the work with contractors. What would be brilliant is if we can get a local woodland working group set up to tackle some of the issues in the woods. So there are some invasive species in there which will need some work to be removed, and that's some great volunteering tasks, coppicing that can be done in there, path clearance, all sorts of things to do to make that woodland brilliant, bursting with wildlife and accessible to local people. So yeah, if you're interested in being part of a group that can do that for that wood, then get in touch with us. It'd be fantastic. That's
lovely, thank you, Ed. It's always good to come away with homework. So that's fantastic. It's really positive though that's sort of underway. So, and if there's any last questions from anyone before we kind of wrap up, I am just going to remind you all that we've got a talk next week, so hopefully it will be of interest to lots of you on the call this evening. So that's about particularly around monitoring wildlife. So why do we monitor wildlife? How can you get involved in monitoring wildlife? Where does your data go? And what sort of resources are there available to help you? So do look out for that. And if you can't find the link, just pop us an email and let us know. But yeah, if there's no further questions, then I'd just say thank you so much to Ed for giving up part of your evening and for going through the presentation. It's really exciting. It's always nice to have local conservation projects, and yeah, we'll really look forward to keeping in touch and sort of seeing how that's all progressing and seeing more of our lovely woodlands improved and safeguarded for the future. Thanks everyone for coming along. And
thank you for inviting me along.
Cheers, Ed.